Today is the 25th of February, 2009. It's a cold, gray morning at Istanbul Ataturk Airport. 135 passengers and crew board Turkish Airlines Flight 1951, a Boeing 737-800, for a routine 2.5-hour flight to Amsterdam. Among them are business travelers, students, and families heading to the Netherlands for half-term break. Nobody on this aircraft has any reason to think today is different from any other Wednesday. Among the passengers is a 21-year-old Dutch student returning home after visiting family in Turkey with a half-finished thesis draft saved on the laptop in his bag. Ordinary plans. Ordinary Wednesday. This plane has flown this route more times than anyone can count. But in the last few weeks, something small and strange has happened to her 3 separate times. Something nobody fixed. Something that is about to matter more than anyone on board could possibly imagine. The flight lifts off Istanbul without incident. 2.5 hours later, she begins her descent into Amsterdam Schiphol, one of the busiest and most modern airports in Europe. The approach to runway 18R looks completely ordinary. Clear skies, light wind, a textbook day for flying. In the cockpit sit an experienced captain, a first officer who is also a training captain, and a third pilot in the jump seat, there to observe. 3 qualified pilots. On paper, this is one of the safest configurations a cockpit can have. In about 6 minutes, that configuration will not be enough. The aircraft is flying an automated approach. The autopilot is engaged, and so is the autothrottle, the system that quietly manages engine power so the pilots don't have to work the throttle levers by hand. It is meant to hold the correct speed all the way to the runway, and it depends on one small sensor buried in the belly of the aircraft, the radio altimeter. This sensor bounces a signal off the ground and tells the computer exactly how high the wheels are above the earth. Below a certain height, that number tells the autothrottle to begin retarding the engines, preparing for touchdown. It is a simple, elegant piece of automation, right up until it lies. Think of it like a thermostat that trusts only one broken sensor in the house. It doesn't matter that every other room reads normal. If that one sensor says the house is freezing, the thermostat will crank the heat right up until something burns. The 737 has 3 altimeters that day. Only one of them is wrong. But the autothrottle isn't built to argue with itself. It simply believes the number it's told to believe. At roughly 1,950 feet, still miles from the runway, the left radio altimeter suddenly reports a height of -8 feet. As far as the computer is concerned, the aircraft is already on the runway. It has no way of knowing this number is wrong. And so, faithfully, exactly as it was built to do, the autothrottle begins pulling the thrust levers back toward idle. Remember this number, -8 feet. It will matter again in less than 5 minutes. The captain and first officer are focused on the approach checklist and the training exercise underway in the cockpit. Neither of them notices the thrust levers quietly sliding backward on their own. The engines, which should be holding a steady cruise power to maintain approach speed, begin to go quiet. This is not the first time this aircraft has done this. The maintenance log shows the same radio altimeter fault occurred twice before, on 2 previous flights, logged by 2 different crews. Both times, the anomaly appeared for a moment, corrected itself, and the flight landed without drama. Both times, mechanics reviewed the report and moved on, because nothing had actually gone wrong. Neither fault was traced back to its source. Neither aircraft was grounded. A warning that appears twice and causes no harm twice stops feeling like a warning. It starts feeling like a quirk, filed away and forgotten by the time this crew ever steps into the cockpit. The airplane continues its glide toward the runway. Airspeed, which should be holding steady near 150 knots, begins to bleed away. Slowly, at first, the kind of decay that doesn't announce itself. At around 500 feet, the aircraft is still descending normally on the glide path. But under the hood, the autothrottle has been idle for a long stretch now, and the wings are getting less and less air moving over them. Altitude is falling exactly as briefed. Speed is falling in a way nobody has briefed at all. The first officer, flying the approach as part of his training, is watching his instruments. Glasses. The captain, in the seat beside him, is watching him fly, coaching rather than flying himself. The observer in the jump seat is watching both of them. 3 sets of eyes, and none of them are watching the one number that is quietly draining away: airspeed. At 460 feet, the aircraft's stick shaker activates. A violent mechanical rattle built into the control column, specifically to make a stall impossible to ignore. It means exactly one thing: the wings are running out of lift, and the airplane is seconds from falling out of the sky. The pilots react immediately, pushing the control column forward and advancing the throttles by hand to try to recover speed. But at this altitude, with the engines already cold and the airspeed already gone, there is no time left to rebuild what has been lost. A jet engine spooling up from near idle takes precious seconds it does not have. The aircraft stalls. The nose drops, and Flight 1951 falls the last few hundred feet into a plowed field, roughly a kilometer short of the runway. The impact tears the aircraft into 3 pieces. The tail section separates. The cockpit and forward fuselage break away almost entirely, crushed by the force of the landing. Passengers in the rear cabin are shaken but largely intact, their seats and structure holding. In the front, the damage is catastrophic. 9 people are killed in the crash, including the captain, the first officer, and the observing pilot in the jump seat. All 3 men in the cockpit, the very people whose job was to catch a fault like this, do not survive it. More than 120 others are injured, some critically. Rescue workers arrive within minutes to find the tail section largely intact, passengers still strapped into rows of seats sitting upright in the mud, while the crushed nose section tells a far darker story just a few meters away. It becomes one of the most closely studied approach and landing accidents of the decade, precisely because so many people lived through a crash that, by any normal measure, should have been unsurvivable. The investigation, led by the Dutch Safety Board, takes months, and it tells a story that has almost nothing to do with pilot skill and almost everything to do with trust. Trust placed in a single point of failure. The aircraft had 2 other altimeter readings available that day, both accurate, both showing the correct height above the ground. But the automation had been built to listen to only one of the 3 at a time, and on this approach, it was listening to the one that was lying. The board's findings do not blame one person. They point to a chain, a known, recurring sensor fault that was reported but never resolved. A monitoring gap in a cockpit where 2 of 3 pilots were focused on a training exercise rather than raw instruments. And an automated system so smooth, so quiet in its failures, that a total loss of engine power could unfold for nearly a minute without a single alarm sounding until it was almost too late. In the years after, airlines were told to treat repeated radio altimeter faults as an unresolved risk rather than a curiosity. Boeing issued guidance reinforcing that pilots must cross-check airspeed manually during every automated approach, regardless of how routine the flight feels. Regulators pushed for earlier, louder warnings when automation silently reduces power, rather than relying on a stick shaker as the very last line of defense. The -8 feet that started it all was never a storm. Never a mechanical explosion. Never anything dramatic enough to notice in the moment. It was a single wrong number, trusted completely, that reached backward through 2 ignored maintenance reports and forward through 6 minutes of ordinary flying, and quietly took 3 pilots and 6 passengers with it. The Dutch student with the half-finished thesis survived, pulled from the wreckage by rescuers who worked through the mud for hours. He would go on to finish that degree. The 3 men in the cockpit, whose entire training existed to catch exactly this kind of failure, never got the chance. Flight 1951 remains one of the clearest reminders in aviation history that the most dangerous failures are not the loud ones. They are the ones no one hears at all, right up until a stick shaker screams the truth with only seconds left to act on it.